Oh, hey. I was waiting for you guys. Why don't we go and sit down and spend a couple minutes and we'll chat?
All right, Steve. Well, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Sure.
I think we're here at home of probably the world's most famous dyno cell, home to legendary Steve Brule. I just why don't you take us to the beginning and kind of how Westech came about and how you guys got your name and what got you started.
Well, actually, I wasn't here at the very, very beginning. Shortly after, but John Bechtold, who was a former editor for Hot Rod Magazine, and a friend of his, Rick Stoner, at the time, the partnership ultimately dissolved, and Rick is the current owner. But at the time when Westech started, it was kind of a situation of a place for the magazines to come test was kind of the vision. And things were, they didn't take off right away. It was a little tougher than it looked. But then it finally picked up enough where what I would do is come from New Mexico for a month or two at a time and do engine projects and builds and that sort of thing. So it started out kind of slow, and then I'd go back to New Mexico, and that was from the early 90s. I mean, that was like 93 or 4 if I remember. And then I finally moved here full time in 1999. Things got busy enough and they took me on full time, so I've worked here since then, and just been fortunate enough through all the original magazine guys, like, as we both know, David Freiburger, Steve Dulcich, that from Engine Masters. Those guys were originally Carcraft, Hot Rod Magazine, Engine Masters Magazine. Steve Dulcich was the editor for that for a number of years. And so when you say the most filmed or famous, it really kind of, in today's world, when it comes to the video stuff and being more recognizable than the print, because a lot of the magazines aren't here anymore, it's really just kind of a continuation of what David and Steve and I had been doing for the last 20 plus years. David had a vision and came in and said, hey, let's try to do this show. And we did a pilot, and he presented it, and they said yes. And, the rest has just been fun.
So you guys are still shooting that show today. How many episodes do you guys shoot here a year? And how many dyno pulls do you think you're doing here a year?
I get asked that question all the time, and it's a hard question to answer. The easy question to answer is we do 26 episodes a season, which is, the show apparently did well enough after the first 4 years or 5 years, 4 years, that they doubled the schedule. Well, actually more than doubled the schedule. They took us from 12 episodes a year to 26. And so that really kind of put the pedal down as far as the schedule and how hard it is to get things done. So we had to focus a lot more on it. But it's really Freiburger's, like I say, kind of his original vision when it was on YouTube and that sort of stuff, to now the current Motor Trend vision. It's kind of David's thing of, the creative portion of it. And we have creative people at Motor Trend that assist with that too, Mikey P, and then all the, the kind of standard television stuff, producers and camera people and all of that. But, the core of Engine Masters, it's the Engine Masters family, really. I mean, the guys who come in here for every episode, and we're on a shoot schedule that most shows just wouldn't be able to deal with. Lighting and all those guys come in on Monday or Sunday, depending on how many episodes we're doing. And they will prep for one day. We have pre-prepped here at Westech, and we shoot an episode per day for 3 or 4 days straight. It's just, the whole atmosphere of the show is just a lot of fun. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a lot of work, and it's some long days sometimes, but it's kind of what makes it all worthwhile when it's done,
Those are some long days. It's a lot of work, and you've been doing this a long time. What keeps you waking up in the morning to come to work and come to Westech and find horsepower?
A lot of times, for a long, long time, it was the parts on the engine. But I have to be honest with you, it's as much the people now that I deal with every day, and the customers and the long-term friends that I've gained over the years, that has become just as significant to me coming and being excited about coming to work every day as it is the engine stuff itself. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm not as interested. I just may not be as interested in all of the things I was 20 years ago. I mean, I have more appreciation for a really cool 500 horsepower, 400 horsepower small block that's period correct and matching numbers and all that than I ever did 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it had to be 600 inches and, you know, pro stocky and all that stuff, and that's what was cool. But I just have a different appreciation, or maybe a wider appreciation range than I used to.
So yeah, I mean that's awesome. I've met an engine builder or two in my day, and there's always that I've been there, done that, know it all, sort of. And you don't really get that with Steve. It's
I don't. I'm dumber now than I've ever been. You know, I think it was Grumpy Jenkins once said, I used to think I knew something. And that's really the case, honestly, with anyone who's been in the industry for a long, long time. You think you're the smartest guy in town when you're 18. You know, you got a fast street car or something, you think you know a little bit. But then when you actually become part of the industry and you get to deal with some of the higher level people, the Billy Godbolds and some of the engine designers and engineers and those people, and we start talking about physics and not just, oh, let's try this, and you start throwing parts at things. I mean, how they really work is what really intrigues me now. I mean, it's amazing the way an engine can run and the RPM ranges that it can run too. It's just pretty amazing.
So speaking of those parts, I would like to get, you know, a little bit of your take on Airflow Research, their cylinder heads, and what they've brought to the market for the last 25, 30 years, and how it's benefited you and what you do for a living.
Well, look, I mean, when we had our phone conversation, you're here because you're a marketing person for Airflow Research and for SCAT products. I get that, but see, the cool part about what I do is I get to pick and choose. I mean, what I like and what I don't like. We're not engine builders who are getting paid by some company to use that part, you know. Over the years, you start to see trends on the good stuff. And so you realize that, you know, the manufacturers who build the quality parts that perform over and over again, as human beings, we all just kind of gravitate in that direction because it ensures our success when we're using successful parts. It's a simple formula, really. I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to know how to use it well. I say never. I haven't been a car guy in the last 20 years. I drag raced boats all through the 90s and into the 2000s until about 2012. Prior to that, I was like everybody else. I street raced. I used parts, but you know, back then, when I lived in Albuquerque, I originally worked for an engine builder. After a stint at one of the really coolest speed shops ever, Guaranteed Auto Parts, then I went to work for McClinic Industries. And back then, when it was Warren Brownfield and Ken Sperling, we were actually, McClinic's race car was on a flyer from Airflow Research, and he was Mr. 11,000, and he was right below Bill Grumpy Jenkins. And that was like the coolest thing ever, you know, some shop out of New Mexico, nowhere. And you were on the cover of Airflow Research's flyer with Bill Grumpy Jenkins. And I remember it was a little purple handout. And it was the coolest thing ever. And that's when Warren was doing some aluminum heads, and Ken was doing, probably at the time, even some of the first development stuff on the Pro Stock Big Block stuff. So back when they were 24 degree headed or 26 degree headed big block stuff. So the first D-port cylinder heads, I mean, all of that stuff that was really kind of innovative when aluminum heads looked like a sponge with water coming out of them sometimes because the castings weren't nearly as effective as they are now. And so it's kind of interesting to me personally to have watched the transition of Airflow Research from then all the way through now in product line and kind of where you guys have ended up. It's pretty good story.
So you were there when they were actually making some of their own castings. We had our own Foundry. Can you tell me about that Foundry and what you saw there? And
I was just simply amazed by the Foundry. And I mean that in the worst way possible. In Pacoima, the first time I went to Airflow Research where they actually built the cylinder head, this is 20 plus years ago, they gave me a little tour, and I had come from Westech up to pick up some heads, I believe. And they took me back to the Foundry. And there was a guy and urn. And there was a guy cooking aluminum, and when it got hot enough, he poured it into this sand casting, and they literally, as I recall, they were making cylinder heads one casting at a time. And they would come out of this core box with handles on each end, and then off to the machine shop. And I couldn't believe that this company that I envisioned as this big cylinder head company was actually literally pouring cylinder heads one at a time. And now to have come from there to as automated and, you know, huge a company as you are now, and how easy it is. I just couldn't believe, honestly, at the time that they could build that good of a head with a hammer and anvil compared to today's standards.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit more about SCAT Cranks, their connecting rods, and what type of success you've had using their products.
I personally use SCAT stuff in one of my race boats. And I won't say that SCAT has a crankshaft or connecting rod for every person building an engine. Only 95% of them. There are the 1500, 1700 horsepower nitrous programs that maybe require a bigger crank, but really, how many of those are there out there? I mean, I use SCAT stuff, and I deal with a number of engine builders that use SCAT components, connecting rods, crankshafts, 12, 1300 horsepower combinations. Certainly 1000, that's just a no-brainer. And one thing I will say is when I built my own engine, and it was actually a project engine through one of the magazines, when I got the crankshaft, I was completely amazed because I had remembered SCAT from the Volkswagen days originally, way back in high school. And when I pulled this crankshaft out, it was a lightweight big block crank that was knife-edged, undercut, pendulum cut counterweights. I mean, it was just a work of art, and I couldn't believe that SCAT did that. And so I kind of became very interested at that point in time. And to this day, I mean, in that kind of 95% marketplace, SCAT is kind of the first go-to thing. I mean, look, realistically, we don't have a steel industry in the United States anymore. And so we talk about offshore and offshore branding. I mean, the SCAT components, for someone to say that they were made in China isn't really even fair. There might have been a forging or a piece of steel that came from China because we don't have an industry here. But because of some unique laws in the US where it says that if the product looks within 30% of what it will finished, you have to say that it was made in China. And that's not even the case. I mean, because it's just not the same part. I mean, it's all done in Long Beach here. You can actually specifically order connecting rods that are 1 under if you're a machine shop, so you can finish them yourselves, you can clearance them yourselves. I mean, they are really, in my opinion, a very upper level component, cranks and rods. You hold a SCAT H-beam up, and you hold 3 other connecting rods that may be more expensive, and I think the quality is pretty comparable. It's in a world today where everything is kind of offshore stuff. I mean, there's so much of it. You know, Tom started doing that years ago because there was a need. I mean, not everybody had $1,800 or $1,900 for a crankshaft. And when you can sell a $400 or $600 or an $800 crankshaft and it be a quality component, I mean, that's what I mean by the 95% market. He's pretty much got that covered.
Steve, have you had the chance to test a whole lot of AFR's products?
You know, over the years, I really probably couldn't count how much AFR testing we've done because there's been, through the magazine industry portion of it, numerous tests. I mean, probably hundreds of tests. Doing testing directly for AFR is something that we also have done for a long, long time, directly with Rick Sperling back to the Tony Mamo days, which is, I think you can kind of gauge how interested a company is in their product by how hard they work at making it good. And when they're constantly testing something, constantly trying to improve something, I mean, we've tested, Rick Sperling and I have sat here and tested a manifold, and he maybe at that moment was not 100% satisfied with the way it came out of the foundry. So then we reschedule a test 4 weeks later, and he comes in with 6 manifolds, and he's modified each one differently. And now that kind of turns into a current small block Chevrolet manifold. But we were able, through that testing, to address what he was not happy with initially and solve that problem and then make that repeatable. So that just shows me the interest level there. I mean, back to even the composite manifold days, we did numerous tests with that. Cylinder head testing, we've tested sizes. I mean, the thing that I appreciate about AFR is it doesn't necessarily have 100 part numbers, but the part numbers that it has are pretty much top level stuff. I mean, they're all top level components. You pick an AFR 335 for a big block, a 377 for a big block. You pick a 195 street eliminator head, even now to the budget minded enforcer line. You know, you open up a hood and you see AFR on it. They've even done that better than most, I think, when they have, even if it's a budget cylinder head, it still has the top level components in it, like, you know, the same valves that AFR uses in their competition series cylinder heads, pack springs, good retainers, all of those parts that can fail first, which cause disasters, have now been addressed too. So, you know, like I say, what I appreciate about kind of AFR's stuff in general is how much testing they do. You know, there's never been a time that I recall where we did any sort of comparative testing with AFR against AFR or AFR against someone else where they didn't end up, like I say, right at the top.
Okay, so you guys are ready for the fast tour of Westech. We're just going to do a quick run through and head this way. This is our chassis dyno. This is Ishmael. He does a whole bunch of the fuel injection tuning. He's the electronics expert. So we've got a Superflow eddy current chassis dyno where we can actually put a load on vehicles, so it really simulates drivability. Okay. And this is some of the fun stuff we get to work on. This guy's been working on this thing for 3 years and having run issues. He finally brought it to us. We verified the engine. Ishmael got some electrical stuff straightened away. And have you seen a cooler 914? This is actually one of our current projects that Rick's working on. This is a PowerMark Superflow dyno. Rick has completely disassembled this thing. They come black. They don't come with all this polished stuff or gauges or any of this kind of stuff, but a standard Superflow dyno isn't good enough for Westech, so Rick's revamping this one completely and making it fuel injection friendly and gasoline friendly and every other friendly, and doing it all out of stainless steel and polished hard ons. This is one of our two 902 cells. This is probably where the PowerMark is going to end up for higher horsepower applications, or kind of, probably my guess is the more kind of typical run-of-the-mill engines, Chevrolets, Fords, that sort of thing. The Superflow 902 still is a very excellent dyno for kind of how versatile it is, so we will certainly keep those in service as well. This one we just pulled a 318 Chrysler off of. It was off of a Super Commando something police thing from way back in the early 60s. We just got done with one there. And in the other 902 cell, we've got kind of a cool big block to look at. This is our number 2 cell. This is another 902. This one uses a cart system. We have numerous carts. This is actually the cell where you see engine masters, the shooting for engine masters done. This is the actual cell, less all of the blue special lighting and all the fancy stuff. But this is a really cool engine. This belongs to a customer of ours from San Diego, Rich Ambler. It goes in an El Camino. It's kind of a 8 stack, but instead of being vertical, it crosses over one another to keep it lower under the hood. Really a pretty unique big block, and that's the fun stuff. Ishmael and myself will be running that tomorrow. This control room is not just where you see Engine Master shot. We use this every day pretty much. This is just the same view that maybe a whole lot of you guys have seen on the Motor Trend channel, or whether it be cable TV or on demand. It's a standard control room where I go to work every day. Here's where I don't want to keep referring to Engine Masters every time, but this is kind of where this is set up, and the view is that way. But this is just where we've got a stack of engines, anything from big blocks to LSs to small block Fords to mechanical fuel injection to 440 Mopar motorhome engines to junkyard 8.1s that Richard Holdner works on for his YouTube channel. We have tons of stuff here to work on to keep us busy and to kind of sometimes drive us nuts. We were talking earlier about testing or evaluating, some of the airflow research cylinder heads, and we've certainly done that here. We actually have a Superflow 600 flow bench. A flow bench being a good indicator of how you make power as far as flow potential. It's not the only thing you need to evaluate when you're making power. There's wet flow and combustion chamber shapes and sizes and all kinds of things that have to be taken into consideration. Airspeed in the ports, but this is a pretty quick way to do a basic evaluation of the ability that the head may have to make power. This was on an episode of Engine Masters. We made 1,500 horsepower on E85 with 2 carburetors, and the most unique thing about it is the manifold. Nobody has a tunnel ram manifold on their blower motor. And you know, we have A-B'd that, and a long runner versus short runner works just the same under a blower as it does with a carburetor on top of it. You know, a lot of people under this misconception that somehow if it's a blower motor, it's somehow magically different. It's really not. It just has more of an atmosphere, a second atmosphere, a third atmosphere on top of the same components. So if you have an intake manifold that's better normally aspirated, you have an intake manifold that's better under the blower just as well. So there's kind of the quick run around Westech. So you got to see most of what we do here and most of the engines and that kind of thing that we've got on the floor, and kind of understand where and how Engine Masters is done. And I think the big thing is you got to see what we think of AFR and SCAT. So I appreciate you guys coming by, and if there's anything you can do for us or we can do for you, just call.